Hello guys, I'm Super Ron. Welcome back to the G Unit and welcome to episode 9 of my GBS Zero build. In this episode we're going to be carrying on with the dry fit and we're going to be bolting more things together, and we need to get this distinctive MNR front end onto it so we can see if it clears the radiator. So let's get on with that. I have already had the body fitted once when it was just a completely bare chassis, so I've done the main modifications to the wraparound body, and surprisingly the rear end is very similar to the MNR. The distance here between the two was almost identical, and the wrap around the back, so that was very helpful. I just needed to do a little bit of trimming around here where it's slightly different to the MNR chassis, but all down the sides is pretty much identical. It was only when it came to the front there was quite a bit of differences. Namely, it's the suspension points, because the MNR chassis has inboard suspension, so it doesn't have all this on the outside. And also, as it turns out, the MNR chassis is a lot wider at the front. At this point, they're very similar to the width, but the front, the GBS chassis, is a lot narrower. So if it's just the body panels themselves, I could have just brought them in. But then what would happen is the nose would be wider than what the body was. So I put the nose on the front and I set the width to line up with the nose cone nicely. So what I had to do is make up these extra bars. At the minute, these are just temporary, but what I think I'll do in the future is maybe make these out of aluminium or just make little standoffs, because the side of the GBS chassis is here, but to get the MNR body to fit, I have to pull this all the way out to there. So that's how much wider each side it is to get it on. And this allows me now to bolt the body on at different points down the chassis, and the rear end can just hug over the standard chassis. And on this side I made a matching one as well that sits on there and brings it out far enough so the body can sit on it and have something to secure to. Something I've touched on before, but this will make it a lot clearer. The reason I'm going to have to move the throttle bodies either up or down, because when this bar is on there, we're not going to clear the throttle bodies. Either side, it just will not work. So I could either cut the body and the bonnet out, which is still going to be very close to the main chassis, which I'm not too happy about, or what I do plan to do is cut the inlet manifold, slice it, because at the minute it comes out and then evens out, because these are the same inlets for the carbs, so the carbs need to be level. But as they're throttle bodies, they can sit at any angle. And what I'd like to do is cut it and then rotate the throttle body so they actually come out like the direct ahead throttle body straight up, which will give me loads of room. I've got loads of clearance in the bonnet, so that's for another day. So for now I'm just going to unbolt these so I can get the brackets on, and then we can start putting the body panels on. So now we've got both rails on and the front end's a bit wider, we can fit the very distinctive MNR Vortx front end. It's quite a Marmite kit. Some people love it, some people absolutely hate it. When I first had the conversation with GBS saying that I've bought the chassis and I was trying to find out any details on it, they asked what body I was putting on, and I said the MNR Vortx body, and they said, oh, the Massey Ferguson front end, oh, that's the one. But me personally, I love it, so let's get it bolted on. The only modifications I had to make was just these two little slots in the bottom, just to clear these radiator mount points, but apart from that, go straight on. The reason I want to get the nose cone back on is to test fit the radiator to check that that clears okay. When I bought the original GBS kit off the other Ron, it came with the standard Mark II Escort radiator that GBS supply, which slots in the front end like that and seems to all work. But on one of my late night eBay sessions, as I mentioned before, I picked up this Dorenza aftermarket radiator for an Escort. It's a lot thicker core and it's aluminium, so it'll aid cooling. So I've got to see if this will fit just as nicely. So a little update, you saw I was chopping a few things about. Had to shorten my bars so they were flush with the end of the chassis. Because the radiator is so much more thicker, it's touching the front there, and we've actually got a bit of a gap here, so I might have to pack the radiator forward slightly. Height wise, we're looking pretty good. I was a bit worried whether the top fill radiator will be high enough for the engine, but it looks like that's going to be perfect, so there's no need for a header tank at the front. The only thing I'm a bit worried about is the bottom radiator hose is going to have to go a bit of an up and over the steering rack, but there's room in there to do it with a few 90 degrees. It'll have to come up and then come forward to the water pump. We could either go up a long way and put the radiator right up, but I don't really want to go any lower because I wouldn't want the radiator lower than the chassis. It will leave it a bit vulnerable, but I just need a little bit more trimming before the nose cone can come on, so let's do that. I got all that fitted on and I think it looks amazing. I love the look of the MNR front end. It's completely different to the normal 7 type fronts. It's a lot taller at the top, and that's given us plenty of room above the radiator. I do plan on making the nose cone easily removable with some latches or some catches on the inside. So like the Caterhams, you can take it off without any tools to check the levels and just check everything's okay if there is a problem. But it sits in there really, really nicely. You can see how much wider the body is compared to the GBS. It's going to tuck everything in really nicely, and I love the flared nostrils at the front. The body actually comes down flush with the side here, so these nostrils stick out at the front and hides all the suspension points, but it fits in there really nicely. So with the nose cone on, next up is the scuttle. This is another very distinguishing part that's only on the MNR, this massive double scoop scuttle, all built in, and also the dashboard is all one piece of this massive scuttle panel. A few things that are going to cause problems here. The MNR Vortx doesn't use a Sierra column, they just have a straight shaft coming out, so they don't have the big bulk, they just have one steering shaft all the way up to the steering wheel, so that requires just one small little cutout. And I think that actually comes out underneath the dash, so you don't have to cut the dash at all. Whereas I think this is just going to need a little trim around it. And the other thing, the MNR has its reservoirs down at the bottom on a pedal box, so it hasn't got this big mass on the top. So first of all, let's get everything lined up and see how it was on the GBS, because even forwards and backwards, I think we're going to have some issues. So I'll show you the GBS setup. As my chassis had already been previously built, I've got all the little trim panels and plates that came with the car, which made it really handy to see how the GBS actually went together. So on the GBS, you had this as your engine bay, and that's completely sealed off all the way around, so the cabin and the engine bay was completely separate. And it all went together. This is actually the scuttle of the Locust that I originally bought, but it's similar size and layout to the GBS. And that kind of sits down in there like that. So with these all down, the GBS one is actually a metal one, and that bonds in place, so you'd have a completely sealed firewall from the engine bay, so if there's any fire, it would be safe from here. The problem is, with the MNR, all this is very different. This scuttle is a lot wider and it's going to creep into this. So I think I'm going to have to cut the scuttle out at this shape and then make a new lid. And the same with the steering column. That's going to require a little bit of chopping this side as well. So let's get the bonnet on, see how far we need to go back and start measuring. got the scuttle on where it's going to sit, fits with the bonnet nicely in there. The steering column is so close to fitting, it's just going to require a little notch just at the bottom, may not even clear the radius. So that's going to be very nicely done. I'm not sure at the moment whether I'm going to have to move the steering column up to the top of the adjustment. I'm going to have to get the seat in and see, because as this is a fixed scuttle and not a windscreen, obviously you can't see through the top bit. So I'm going to have to sit in there with the seats in and see what level we need to have the steering wheel at. The brake and clutch master cylinders, I took them off to get them to fit. Without them, it fits in there nicely. And these are obviously going to have to bolt somewhere in line there. So they're going to notch into the scuttle quite a bit. So I think what I'm going to do to start with is take the reservoir off to make as smaller hole as possible. And what we'll end up doing is cutting a square out, and then I'll modify or remake the GBS cover so that will fit in there and fit nice and smooth up to the MNR scuttle. I'm going to have to see what the situation is with the reservoir filler caps, whether they're going to be accessible here or whether I'm going to have to do something a little bit creative with the scuttle to make sure they can be checked and we can fill them up from the engine bay side, but still keep it sealed from the engine bay. But overall, I think it's going to look pretty cool. This side sitting nice and flush, and you can see it's not too far back from where the original GBS one was. There's the rail that came across, so we're not far off. It's all going to work nicely. So I'm going to have to do some measuring and cutting next. After a little bit of chopping, got that sitting in there really nicely. Sits perfectly to the firewall, so you don't have to cut out any more to get to the filler cap, which I'm really happy with. On the clutch, it's just over the centre line, so even if I cut it out, that'd have to be right inside underneath. But what you can get is little banjos that go on there, like a bit of a relocation kit. So if I can get one of them and just have this just forward next to this one inside the box, then that'll be a lot better. So I'm really happy with that, how that's just been a few bits to cut out. And then to keep it sealed, I'll remake one of these boxes. But it's going to be pretty much like that. I could even modify this one, just bend the tabs a little bit. I think that's going to fit in there really nice. And that's the column cut in, and it's come out absolutely perfect. It looks like a factory hole. So snug around there. That's with the steering column all the way up. So that's the most it's going to be. So like I said earlier, we're going to have to see whether we need to move it up some more because of the screen, or not a screen as it may be. And I'm going to have to get a little bit creative with the plugs because there's not a lot of room on the back for those. And I just had to make another little hole for, can't really even see it, for the steering shaft to come through there. All in all, very happy. And just put the bonnet on as well so you can see how nicely it fits. I really do love this kit. So slightly different to the normal 7, the massive double bubble centerpiece, and the way it bulges through to the bonnet. And the love it or hate it front end. Personally, I think it looks fantastic. And with those few bits trimmed in, that's going to bring an end to this episode because unfortunately, once again, we are out of time. I'm really happy with how progress has gone today. We've gotten answers to quite a few questions. We now know that the radiator is going to be tall enough so that the system can bleed up into it. It is higher than the engine all the way along, and it's going to hold a nice lot of water. And one thing I was getting a little bit worried about is how much I was going to have to chop up this lovely sleek scuttle here, because the Sierra column where the switches and bits are is so big. I thought I was going to have to cut a massive hole and make a mess of everything. But I've had to make the smallest little incision, and you can't even see it once the column is fitted. The same with the brake reservoir. I wasn't sure whether it's going to sit under the scuttle or too far in the engine bay or just wrong. But again, that couldn't have been more perfect. The fill up is just in the engine bay, just exactly as it is on the GBS Zero. So I've got a few more little tiny, just to tidy up the edges and get it all fitting nice. But I'm going to wait until I get the body on, because it does just raise this just a few millimeters, because it sits on top of the body, between the body and these rails. So there's just a few little millimeters that it will move up and move about. So I'll get the body back on, and it does look a lot better. It looks a bit strange with all this being white, but once all the white is down the middle, it looks so sleek. It looks absolutely fantastic. I do love the MNR body. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as well. We haven't done any fabrication this time, but there's just been a lot of dust, a lot of fiberglass flying everywhere. And I think it's all been worthwhile. It's the little jobs that just take so long. I've been down here all day. Even though it seems like I haven't done a lot, it's all the little tedious marking, making sure you cut it in the right place, and you cut it once and you do it right. So if you've enjoyed it as much as I have, make sure you give it a like. And next time we'll just be fettling a bit more and moving along with the build. So until next time, make sure you have fun.